Let's go over my thoughts and ratings of the 6 books I read in the 14th week of 2026. Sarafina by Fracassi follows 3 brothers who are fighting for the Confederacy in the Civil War when they decide to go AWOL and stumble across this homestead owned by a woman named Sarafina who introduces them to a whole new level of supernatural horrors. Okay, let's get out of the way the fact that this book has heavy religious themes and religion is used as a plot device that's woven throughout this story, and that's not typically something that I enjoy. That being said, I thought it was incredibly well done, and I really appreciated how the author used these themes to craft who these characters are and give reasoning to the decisions that they are making. I liked how religion was sort of used as a metaphor for these characters looking for answers in this unknown despair. The whole concept of this book is wild. It's like this supernatural ancient evil that is holding these men captive and torturing them. It felt slightly reminiscent of some other horror, fairy tale-esque folklore, supernatural books that I've read, while still remaining original. This story had a lot going on, not only with the physical violence, but with the psychological aspects that these characters are enduring. This story just had me gasping for air throughout. This book is smart and scary and jam-packed full of chaotic action. It's deranged and heart-pounding. It's emotionally charged and it's utterly brutal. This is a really good book, and if I had DNF'd it because it has elements that I don't typically like, then I would have really been missing out. I like to challenge myself and push past things that maybe I don't typically like because you never know, it could surprise you, and this one definitely did. I rated it 4.25 stars. The Seventh Sister by Dawn Kurtagich follows the Ward sisters, and they are sent to live on an isolated, forest-ridden island that is owned by their grandmother after their parents' passing. Overcome with grief and stuck in isolation, the girls get entangled with some ritualistic ongoing. Think kids running wild in the forest that are looking for purpose and find themselves developing this cult-like devotion to an entity living within the forest. The story has past and present timelines. The past timeline is the sisters growing up on this island, and in present day we're mostly following one of the sisters as she is taking us back to the island when she and her sisters are called there by a cryptic letter. Throughout the story we slowly uncover what happened all those years ago and why the horrors are not quite over yet. The vibes in this were immaculate. I could smell the trees, I could feel the moss. I was just all consumed by the atmosphere of this book. It completely transported me. It had this creepy sense of dread throughout that just had me on the edge of my seat and just lingered and festered and just really got under my skin. And while this was eerie and unsettling, it was also somehow kind of charming and whimsical at the same time. It had heavy themes of survival and sisterly bonds and cult-like mentality. Culty forest children running wild book that just stole my heart. I absolutely love this read. I think it's absolutely unforgettable. I have just been thinking about it nonstop since I finished it. I thought this was so psychologically captivating, and there was this level of ambiguity to it that was just this perfect level of uncertainty that I really appreciated, and I also thought all of the characters were so well fleshed out, and the ones that we focused on specifically, I really just cared for them and was invested in their well-being throughout the story. I feel like this book took all of my favorite parts of books that I love so much, like What Lies in the Woods by Kate Alice Marshall, Nowhere Burning by Katrina Ward, and The Mean Ones by Tatiana Shaloti-Bonet, and just plucked out those elements and stuffed them all into one book in a way that just totally worked for me and just made this an unforgettable reading experience. If you can't tell, I was absolutely obsessed with this book. I have 0 notes and I rated it 5 stars. I then did a segment of best or worst thriller books where I read The Hike by Lucy Clark and The Hollows by Mark Edwards, which should have been in the horror bowl, but I rated The Hike by Lucy Clark 3.5 stars, and I rated The Hollows by Mark Edwards 4.5 stars. If you're interested in my thoughts on either of those books, you can go ahead and watch that reading vlog. Aviary by Maria Dong follows Heejin, and she is an undocumented immigrant in South Korea that is facing deportation. When she realizes that her sister has mysteriously and tragically passed away, she decides to assume her sister's identity and winds up in the United States at this weird art program that turns out to be way more sinister than she could have ever imagined. This story blends together grief with Korean folklore and the exploitation of women. With themes of oppressive control, manipulation, body horror, torture, and misogyny, this book really packs a punch. In this story, there's these dreamlike sequences that really blend fiction and reality and just really capture what these women are going through, and I thought it was done very well. Now, I will say that some of the writing and the structure of the story gets a bit disorienting, but I feel like my reading experience being confused and disoriented kind of mirrored that experience of the character Heejin and what she was going through and all of these psychological horrors that she was enduring. The story is haunting and sickening. Throughout the story, we're following Heejin, and then we're also following another character named Callie, and I really empathized with both of the women in their situations and could really understand how they got to where they are and just really felt for them. I felt so much empathy and rage and frustration throughout this book. I think the author did an excellent job of pulling these emotions out of me. Now, all that to be said, I did have some issues with this book, mainly that I felt like there was too many unanswered questions. I'm somebody that loves ambiguity in horror books, but there are times where I'm just like, okay, just lay it out for me and explain some things. And I definitely found myself wanting answers to several questions by the end. That being said, I thought this was a really good book and I rated it 4 stars. The Counting Game by Sinead Nolan follows the disappearance of a 13-year-old girl named Saoirse in Ireland. She and her brother Jack were playing this game called The Counting Game. Think like a sinister version of hide and seek. Throughout the story, we're mainly flip-flopping between 2 different POVs. The first one is of this psychotherapist that is hired. Her name is Freya, and she's brought on to talk to Jack because Jack won't speak. And then the other POV is Jack, Saoirse's little brother. Jack's POV really paints a portrait of his family, mainly his sister Saoirse and her dynamics with the people in her life. And then we have Freya, the psychotherapist POV, and we just really dive into her headspace and who she is and what makes her tick. And I thought she was such an endearing character, and I could totally see the author making her own series, and I would definitely read every book in that series. I just really enjoyed Freya as a character. I really enjoyed the vibe of this book. I really enjoyed this book. It kept me guessing. There was some great placed red herrings throughout. I didn't know who to trust. And yeah, I thought this was just a really good read. It kind of reminded me a little tiny bit of a more darkly atmospheric and sinister version of The God of the Woods by Liz Moore, but in Ireland. I will say this is kind of a slow burn. I know some people don't like that. Personally, it worked for me in this book and I really enjoyed it. I really don't have anything negative to say about this book, but it's feeling like a 4-star read to me. Thank you so much for watching. My favorite book that I read last week was, of course, The Seventh Sister by Dawn Kurdayich. Please let me know in the comments what your favorite book was that you read last week. On Monday, I am going to New York City for the first time. I have a jam-packed schedule. I'm not sure how much reading I'm going to get done. So next time I do one of these wrap-ups, it's probably not going to have that many books in it. I will read on the flights and I'll read in the evenings and I'll read when I can, but just a heads up that I probably won't be reading a book a day while on my trip.